We made this.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey!
Hello and welcome to Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast here on the We Made This podcast network, where we'll be looking at Waiting for God, which was episode 4 of series 1 of Red Dwarf. With me at this time is my regular co-host, Kurt North. Hello, Kurt.
Hello, I'm currently on a woman's period. You have to apologise.
Oh, dear.
I have to apologise.
And one of our semi-regular guest hosts, welcome back, Carl Bryan.
Hello there, I'm currently wearing the sacred gravy mark.
Quickly think of good quote. I'm looking nice. There we go.
How are you looking now?
Still nice. Oh, we're such nerds, which is good, because we need to be for a show like this. We're looking at Waiting for God, which was first broadcast on the 7th of March. But before we do, I have got my little report back from last episode about whether or not Hermann Goering was a drug-crazed transvestite.
Oh, yes, I completely forgot about that. Do tell.
So I did just Google it, and on the Red Dwarf forums, it seems like one random historian by the name of Irving, speculated that he was a transvestite, but didn't really have any evidence and has been completely discredited. But let's not let that get in the way of a good story.
It's in canon. As far as I'm concerned, it's in canon. We're happy.
Yeah, and maybe he was. There's no proof that he wasn't a drug-crazed transvestite. It's just that the random proof that he might have been has been discredited.
We could always, in this new fake world news cycle, we could always try and recreate something and make it happen.
That's true, and I would like to think that he was a drug-crazed transvestite because, you know, who doesn't want a fleshed-out, lovable Nazi? Wait, no. Moving on. So, we start the episode with the usual Holly recap, which confirms that Lister lied when he said he'd passed the chef's exam and wound up Rimmer by saying he'd passed it when he'd actually failed. We start the show with Rimmer asking for the confidential files on everybody on Red Dwarf, and it's the usual kind of back and forth stuff with Holly, and eventually Rimmer manages to convince him that he is the senior officer and should therefore have it, and he quite likes it when Lister's report is quite scathing, and then gets quite grumpy when his is scathing as well. And I think that's very Rimmer in the kind of way that it's done. I thought it was really good.
It sums him up very much in a way when Holly says those are for the captain's eyes only, and he comes straight out with, well, let's just wait for him to come back from the dead and assume I'm in charge, and then looking at his watch. That's such a Rimmer way of doing it.
Yeah, any way around that he can get around the actual things just to become that officer in charge is the way that Rimmer generally works, isn't it? So I think that works to his character, absolutely.
Mm.
And the was it Lister he worked for 9 years as a supermarket trolley attendant, but didn't want to get tied down to a career. I thought that was a really good line. That was, if the job's worth doing, it's worth doing well. If it's not worth doing, give it to Rimmer.
Yes.
Oh, and I particularly pulled out the fact that Lister's captain remarks about his trips of diuretic issues. I thought that was pretty telling with his Vindaloos as well.
Yeah, I think it's very much, again, it surprises me just how much that is important throughout the whole series is established within the first episodes. You know, there's the whole Vindaluian Empire, which is a wonderful episode later on. And all this stuff that you associate with these characters is established in the first series.
Yeah,
it is. And I think the one of the things, I'm not sure if it was this episode or maybe the episode before, where they were talking about the fact that, you know, it's obviously a lager drinker and things, and we will see later in the seasons that we get more reds and stuff. It's very grey at the moment, but they actually put the cans of lager that they use. I can't remember what it's called now. Is it leopard lager or something like that?
Yeah, leopard lager.
Yeah, the actually most of the budget was spent on making those can wraps, just had a bit of colour, which I find brilliant. But that just goes to show you how much they want to like really kind of push up on the character detail.
Yeah, I think as well when we're going through the files there, it's kind of telling as to in military and sort of ladders of promotion that when it reels off chances of promotion, Lister's is 0, but Rimmer's is comical. So Lister almost has a better chance of promotion than Rimmer does. He's not as nasty about his chances, which I thought was really funny.
Whilst there, Holly spots that there is a UO, unidentified object, on the scanner, and, well, Rimmer rushes to the quarters where Lister is sniffing a book. Toaster offers him some toast, funnily enough, and they talk about this cat book where you read by smelling. And there's a wonderful conversation about Shakespeare, again going into this educated and intelligent and ignorance thing that they've been exploring through the whole series. Rimmer has a go at Lister for not knowing who Wilfrid Shakespeare is, and I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah, there's a few of those. I think it's in the last episode where he says, "Why don't you listen to something like Mozart or Mendelssohn or Motorhead?" And part of me was trying to figure out if that was Rimmer just getting it wrong, or if Rimmer was actually a big Motorhead fan. Just as the years have gone on and the future's come that Motorhead is regarded as classical music, really tickled me.
Yeah, I personally I'm just looking at something there just to check my dates. But I also think that the use of Wilfrid Shakespeare might, I'm only inferring here, that Star Trek The Next Generation started in September 87. This came out in March 88. And the head captain of the Starship Enterprise at that point is Jean-Luc Picard, who was very Shakespearean. He had Shakespeare knowledge. And I'm just wondering if that was a little nod to the fact that it is a spaceship show, that whether or not they've nodded a little bit towards that TV show as well.
I didn't realise Star Trek Next Generation was that early.
Yeah, 1987 it came out. Obviously, it came out here later, we would have thought. But yeah, the first episode was September 87.
Next Gen had a significantly larger budget than Red Dwarf, and I think it shows, despite the fact they were both launched at the similar times. Yeah, there's a big difference, isn't there?
None of the Enterprise is made out of spray-painted bread boxes.
Oh, dear me. I don't care. I've never cared that the sets are a bit naff. And it's just... I'm almost, like, blind to how naff they are because I'm enjoying the dialogue so much.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean by the only reason why I was referring to it was more the fact that, you know, it's referring more to the fact that Shakespeare is heavily used in Star Trek as a storytelling element, where this is like, oh well, we know someone. It's that was called Wilfrid Shakespeare. You know, it's kind of like, you know, they react so much onto it and you know, pull information from it with the way that Picard was. Whereas here it's more like it's faded in time, and a lot of people would say that Shakespeare will forever be written and forever be like retread upon. But you know, we're talking in 3 million years with Rimmer. He obviously doesn't. He remembers or knows of him, but doesn't quite get it right.
This scene also has one. I just love the way the Lister's taking the mickey out of Rimmer being uptight and putting his pants on coat hangers and stuff like that. It's just, again, establishment of this relationship we've explored of them being brothers who take the piss.
And Rimmer's uptightness in that he has an example for, would you steal Veruca cream from a man who's got no feet? It's beside the point, but he's still got that sort of example to try and hammer it home to Lister that this shouldn't be done, when there's no real need, because he doesn't need his clothes anymore.
But it is, but they are his, so I can see it's an interesting dynamic, that, because it's, you know, it is his stuff, but he's not going to ever use it again. But at the end of the day, it's his possessions, isn't it? So, yeah, it's a weird one.
I was trying to figure out when he's going through the stains, how do you create a stain that big with biscuit?
Do you know, I didn't spot that, but you're absolutely right. Of all the flubs for you to point out, Carl, There's a lot more flubs in Red Dwarf than a biscuit stain. Dear me. So we move on to the cat with his food detector, which is basically his finger on his nose, and he bumps into Rimmer, and they have a conversation about his shiny thing. This is really early, but this is Mark's line of the week, and this is smooth with a capital SMOO, which, again, is something that I still use to this day. If someone's looking stylish, I'll say you're looking smooth with a capital SMOO.
I use it as well, yeah.
Carl, you said last episode you don't do them, and within the space of 2 episodes, you've named 2 or 3. I love that.
I know it's going to be a very long sort of period of self-evaluation. My appearances on this, how much it's influenced my life.
I'm just wondering if there's ever going to be an episode that I don't quote on a regular basis as part of my regular phraseology and vocabulary, because we're 4 for 4 going so far. It was never supposed to be a thing, but it clearly fucking is. Mark quote of the week. There we go.
The thing as well I love about getting to the cat in these early ones is the suits are amazing. They're just brilliant.
Oh, I would kill for the cat suits.
With
Absolutely kill for the cat suits. They're all fabulous.
Yeah. And he does the jump and roll in one, and he gets up and it's still immaculate.
Yeah.
I mean, I know Danny John Jules is he did like Starlight Express and all that kind of thing, so that's not a massive deal for him, but it still must have been tricky doing it in a full 3-piece suit.
I was about to say, was it Danny John Jules doing his own stunts? And you answered my question before I asked it. You have legit knowledge, Carl.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, well, I think something they need to pick out as well, which will come in later, but effectively the string game with the yo-yo, which I think is really, it's good. I always enjoy those moments. You'll catch up. I know you haven't seen the Dave ones yet, but there's some jokes in the new one, the Promised Land, where it just really re-emphasizes the fact that he's a cat, and the fact that the string is dangling and he's being able to play with it and things really works for me. And just developing that side of things, because as I say, as you mentioned last episode, that kind of doesn't ever go away, but it kind of lingers in the background. Whereas at the moment he's still very much a cat, and the string on the yo-yo is a case in point.
He seems to get, in these early episodes, he seems to get one. He gets lots of sort of little gags, but he seems to get one big gag an episode. And I think with the last one it was fish, and with this one it's the string. It's like he seems to get, like, there's just one massive cat moment in each one for him. And I think this is probably one of the earliest and probably one of the biggest ones he has is the catch that string, and it sums him up really. Like, he doesn't know what a yo-yo is, but it's almost like he sees it from a much different perspective of, whereas everyone else will be like, oh yeah, it's a yo-yo, and you do it as you would a yo-yo. He'll flip it upside down because for him, the string's the most important bit.
It's a very cleverly written character that's, in a lot of ways, certainly in this series, very, very shallow. But Danny John Jules does it with such grace and legitimate enthusiasm, and really embraces and understands the character and cats. So it's a lesser actor might have thought that it was beneath them, this part, but Danny John Jules makes it something so fucking special.
I'm actually curious. I'm going to have a quick look during this episode if Danny John Jules actually was in Cats, the musical. Because if he was, that probably did help him with a lot of his movements and stuff. Because I can imagine he has done those before. But I'll update you if he has been in that. But that'd be interesting to see if that's there and if that influenced what he was doing.
Yeah, I mean something I want to pick up actually with the next scene with the milk, and I didn't mention it last time I was on. I think it was the pilot episode, that when Lister comes out of 3 million years stasis, and then he finds the cat and he feeds the cat 3 million years on by opening a locker and putting milk out. And I'm just thinking, well, this was something that my girlfriend actually mentioned to me. It's like that milk would have been fairly stale.
Cheese.
It would have been very cheese. Some might even say smeg.
Oh.
Just looking here, it doesn't look like he has been in Cats. Oh, no, he has. Yes, he has. Danny John Jules, Cats at the New London Theatre. So he has had the previous in doing Cats.
Well, there you go. Maybe that was part of what his application for the role was. Good grief. So you're right, the cat does come in, and he's got the Holy Book for Lister to read after Rimmer has asked Holly to bring in the unidentified object, but the cat doesn't think that Lister is Cloister. But it does give a quick recap of the show's premise at this point, almost organically, but I spotted that it's like, this is just in case people haven't watched any episodes, I thought.
Yeah, I think you get that. I think the opening Holly discussion and the episodes so far that we've had, it tends to reiterate what everything is. And it's just development on either side of whichever story they're kind of focusing on. I mean, this week it's more on Kat's side of it. So I get that, but they kind of retell it. So
I wonder if it's an element of lack of confidence in the audience understanding it. We have touched on this in previous episodes, but I think, didn't you say, Kurt, that there's an element of they weren't sure how this was going to be received. So it's not that they're being patronising per se, it's just making sure that the audience is following along.
I was wondering about that, because I can't think of any other shows where at the start of every episode they recap the premise of the series. And I wondered if it was just because the actual sort of world of it is so big and there's a lot going on right from the off, that if you were to drop in on like the third episode, you wouldn't have a clue what was going on.
We've got to remember that this wasn't launched during a binge-watching culture.
No.
It was launched where you would watch this episodically, and if you missed it, you fucking missed it. There was no catch-up, there was no Netflix, there was no anything. I mean, this is even way before Napster, you know?
Yeah.
So
whenever anyone mentions about missing TV shows, I always go back, and I don't know if you two have ever watched it, but Lost, and that was in 2004. So that was only 2004, 2006 maybe. And I watched that religiously. It was on Channel 4. I watched it every single episode, and I missed episode 11, and it was the worst episode to miss in the world, because I came back to it the following week, and I was like, what the fuck is going on here? Where's Charlie? What's happened to him? And they weren't physically telling you, because it was a continuation. They weren't like, oh, Charlie's gone and done this, and they've been disappeared, and this person's taken him, because it was told from the viewpoint of the people who were in the plane, not the abductor. And it really, and when eventually, it still took me till I bought the DVDs like 6 months later to watch that episode. So, and then this was 1988. So yeah, I think that makes a big difference.
The time when you were watching Lost was almost like a transitional period between what was going on in Red Dwarf time to what we have now, where everybody gets everything immediately, and they get it and they binge it. There was a lot of binge culture then, but it was with just the DVDs. There really still wasn't a way, other than perhaps videoing stuff off the telly. But that was more difficult than getting the whole thing in your hand. I can watch this from start to finish, you know?
Which reminds me of Video Plus. Do you remember that, when you used to have to put the code in? And it would always lop off the first couple of minutes or lop off the last couple of minutes.
I do remember Video Plus. That's a throwback and a half. Oh, I remember
the rage that Video Plus created.
Well, they then started doing I think there was the one where you could actually, I think it was Video Plus, but you could add extra minutes on either side. So you could add like 2 or 3.
They did that.
Yeah, so just in case you did miss it, if it was taken up, Video Plus, that's up there with short play and long play for me.
Yeah.
Short play, long play. Oh man.
Yeah, when you could
get
get
4-hour videotape, and it was 8 hours.
Yeah, you could get 8 episodes of the X-Files on the VHS rather than 4. It was amazing.
2 whole series of Red Dwarf.
2 whole series of Red Dwarf, yeah.
Red Dwarf's probably one of the only shows that's held to the we're going to do 6 half-hour episodes, and that's the series. They're probably one of the only... I mean, in later series, you do get the ones that are a couple of two-parters to knock it up to about 7 or 8, but they've really stuck to that traditional sitcom formula of 6 half hours, that's a series. And I like that. I think that's good, that somebody's still upholding that. Because, I mean, because a lot of people go with the American model now, you've got to have 23 episodes. They've got to be 45 minutes. There's some shows out there that don't need to be 45 minutes an episode.
No, and I like the almost accessible 28 minutes that is an episode of Red Dwarf. Sometimes you do need less than an hour of entertainment to fill, I don't know, you're waiting for someone to arrive or whatever. And there are so few shows now that are only half an hour.
Yeah, I mean, I would go back to the whole Star Trek thing, and we were talking off air about various different things, but I've probably seen Red Dwarf more than I would have seen a lot of some episodes of Star Trek, purely because of the format, because of that. You know, it's a 30-minute TV show that you can put on, and it's almost like background music because you've seen it so many times. Whereas watching a 45-minute piece of television is just that little bit harder. It's not as easy to put it on. I mean, Star Trek was probably not as bad because it was on 6 p.m. on a Tuesday night, on every night or whatever. X-Files is probably harder because it was the type of show it is. But Red Dwarf was one of those ones you could just throw on and, you know, spend a couple. But even if you had a couple of hours time, you could throw on 2 or 3 episodes, couldn't you? So that always felt natural. So
you can watch a whole series now in the same time it took to watch The Irishman.
Yeah, yeah.
Ha! Nice comparison there, Carl. I know what I prefer as well.
Yeah, I think The Irishman's actually longer. It's longer than 3 hours.
3 hours, 18 minutes, The Irishman.
Yeah. So you could start on the next series
Yeah.
after you've watched the whole series.
You could get through pretty much all of the next episode of the season.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So if we're doing these kind of comparisons, one of your homeworks for either of you is to find out whether you could watch all of the extended Lord of the Rings in the same amount of time as the first 6 series of Red Dwarf. Because my prediction is that it will be Red Dwarf. You could watch series 1 to 6 in less time than you could watch the full extended versions of Lord of the Rings.
How long's each one? I'll look into that. I'll come back to you on my next episode.
Yeah, that's your homework, Carl. Anyway, we're being very kind of tangent tornado. So let's move back to the plot. The Ewer arrives and they head to the observation room. Rimmer very much emphasises that it belongs to him and that he thinks it's an alien. And Lister is taking the piss because he's already worked out. And then he works out that it's actually a Red Dwarf rubbish pod. And this is a classic audience knows more than a character thing, which is really done very well. And I think throughout the episode, Rimmer comes across as quite sympathetic in his dedication towards what he thinks is going to be his kind of magnum opus discovery sort of thing. And Rimmer starts to become more lovable.
He does. I wanted to bring up the fact that what's interesting with this episode is that each of the characters are dealing with like what they perceive as their holy grail. So you've got obviously the cat, we're not necessarily talking about the cat because obviously he doesn't believe it, but there's this aspiration that, you know, he wants it to be aliens. It's not a religious kind of aspect. It's more, you know, a science thing. He wants to have his new body. He wants to, you know, to believe in that, to want to believe in that, because at the end of the day, that, you know, that could be his ultimate thing, to be able to touch again and things. Whereas, you know, the cat story, even though the cat, it is a cat story, it's more a Lister kind of dealing with the issues of people seeing him like that. It's almost like a reflection of Lister and Rimmer in some ways. And then obviously, you know, with this story interloped in between the two of them.
Yeah. So someone who didn't want any responsibility is suddenly given the biggest responsibility of all time, in that he's a god to a race of people. It's it's directly opposite. And bless him, as like I said, making him more lovable. Rimmer wants this so bad in this episode. Yeah. He wants it to be aliens so badly.
It's really sympathetic, and I think it's the first time he's been treated quite so sympathetically. He's gone through a lot when you actually think about it. I don't think I'd be very happy if I knew how I died, and my consciousness was in a hologram and I couldn't ever touch anyone again. That's incredibly traumatic.
It does make me wonder, obviously I wasn't on this episode, I don't know if you mentioned it, but in the first episode when Rimmer first appears, I always used to wonder, how long has he been mooching about on his own before Lister got out of stasis?
We didn't mention it, but it did cross my mind when I watched it.
It's not explicit at all, is it?
He has been on at some point for a while, the way that it's implied, but it doesn't say, if he's been 3 million years. There's a couple of comments that are made, so he has been around, but I don't know if it's been a case of, as I say, it's not explicit, whether or not it could be that they knew he was coming out of stasis because it was getting safe again, that Holly activated Rimmer before it became safe.
Yeah. I think that's implicit, but it's not really confirmed.
No, it's not. No.
Because he's already come to terms with the idea that he's dead when he gets there, and because he seems to be very almost accepting of his lot that he's now going to be stuck with Lister when he first appears. And I think this episode, when he realises that there could be aliens and he could get a new body, and presumably I think he thinks with getting a new body he could probably leave, might be on his mind as well. So it's why it's interesting to me how he's so excited about it, in that this could be a whole new lease, literally a new lease of life for him, in that he could get that body that he wants.
Yeah, it's not a aspect we've seen before, is it either? So I think that we've seen so much of him having this power hungry aspect to him, and the biting towards Rimmer and the Lister, and the aspiration of becoming an officer and living up to what he believes he should be. But this is a new character trait with him, which is really interesting that they're developing that.
And he's so clearly excited by the way he behaves and, wakes up Lister. But what I find, I do tend to focus on stuff about religion because of the nature of my real life job. But Rimmer explicitly says he doesn't believe in God, but he believes in aliens. And I think that's an interesting and quite bold thing to be doing in 1988.
At the time, because obviously you've got your big sort of, Songs of Praise was still a thing, and The Highway was still on at the weekends with Harry Seacombe. And Songs of Praise is still a thing, but it's definitely a lot more predominantly Christian, I think, than it is these days.
Yeah, we're talking on a Sunday. I'm surprised I remembered it a Sunday, to be honest. But I always used to remember that Songs of Praise used to be on at 5 p.m, just before, I live near Scotland, before Scotsport came on. So it's always one of those things, or just after Scotsport, I think it was 6 o'clock at night. So it was always one of those things that was always on, even though I'm not a religious person at all. But you were aware of it, and there was always that tradition of Songs of Praise being on that day at that time.
Yeah, and there's in this scene there's a lot of philosophy about mysteries and people, and touching on religion during that, I think, is relatively brave considering the age. But what did you think about the idea of people being a disease on a planet as a metaphor? That was quite visceral for me.
Yeah, it reminds me of. I remember talking about this years ago. My father's passed away a long time ago, but we used to have a chat about these sort of things every so often, because he was not a religious man at all. And he once equated, because we talked about the afterlife and things like that, and he equated us to plants in a similar fashion of, you're born, you grow, you die. And it was sort of like you were no different to like a flower or something like that. You're just alive for a lot longer period of time. And I thought that was interesting. So then when I heard you're the equivalent of herpes on a planet, I was like, that's an interesting thing of looking at it in a very basic, almost breaking it down to like you're a bit of plant life, or you're a bit of almost taking the emotion out of it and looking at it like, well, that's you're organic, so you're essentially like a plant.
Yeah, I mean, with the depletion of the ozone layer, there was a paper released in about 1985 that talked about the ozone depletion, and I remember it being a thing on the news, but I can't remember if it was prevalent during this kind of era. But if the paper was released in 1985 and there was that aspect to it, whether or not that they are reflecting on the issue that we are damaging our own planet from there, that may well be something that they were touching upon. And if they were, then that is deeper than you would expect a comedy show to go, and for people to really kind of cotton onto, really. And if they have done that, I'm only surmising, but that's certainly a position that you could take with the year that this was released compared to this paper that was released in 1985.
No, I think you're being completely fair here, Kurt. There have been so many sitcoms that haven't stood the test of time. There are so many that were on once or twice, repeated maybe, but then they haven't received the cult status of something like Red Dwarf. And I think that's because this really was a huge kind of labour of love for the writers, and you can see that in almost every scene.
Yeah, I mean, there was. I think I was watching one of the behind-the-scenes documentaries for this series, and they were talking about how while this was going out, there were still things like Terry and June, and The Good Life, and Ever Decreasing Circles, not Ever Decreasing Circles, but The Good Life being made, and that kind of cozy. We live in a nice suburb and this, that, the other. And then you've got Red Dwarf exploring themes of, religion and belief and existential loneliness. And it's the more, and I think I'm probably going to see this the more as we go through the series, the more I go back and watch it, you realise that Rob Grant and Doug Naylor probably were really putting a lot more in than you can see on the surface.
Having done this podcast, it's a lot more sophisticated to me now than it ever was when I was watching it casually and just enjoying it because it was funny and clever.
I totally agree with that. Absolutely, 100% agree with that.
I mean, there's one episode I remember and it stuck with me then, it still sticks with me now. It's Thanks for the Memory. Oh no, it's Better Than Life. Sorry, where they get the post and Rimmer gets told his dad's dead, and he's standing in the globe and he goes, I knew he was dead. Well, they're all dead, aren't they? And it's like, oh, God, that's a depressing yet true thing. It's like, they are. They're all dead.
Everybody's dead.
Yeah, everybody's dead.
Everybody's dead, Carl.
Yeah.
Carl, everybody is dead.
You need to tell me everybody's dead.
Everybody's dead, Carl.
So they eventually get to the control room and Lister has a chicken vindaloo and a beer milkshake for breakfast, and the translation confirms that he is indeed Cloyster, and the cats died out during a holy war over hat colours. And then the people who were left in arcs to search for Fiji. And as funny as it is, it's really fucking tragic as well.
Especially when you realise that both sides got it wrong.
Yeah.
One side thought it was red, one side thought it was blue, and Lister said it was supposed to be green. That's telling.
Yeah, I think it's directed. I think even Rimmer says something along those lines as well. But the fact that they use the themes like the arcs and stuff like that, which is interesting in itself. And also they don't, because we find the character later on, but they have all left, and it gives them another chance just to tell this story, but to not have to keep them there or have this story over the story of Red Dwarf in total. That they've long gone. That these creatures have lived on Red Dwarf for I'd say 2 million years, for example, and and the inner conflict between the two of having this inner conflict over that. I think they mentioned last episode there was the conflict was over Cloyster or Lister or whatever the name was going to be, which is, so they've just slightly retooled that. But the very idea that they've had this fight, and even Lister acknowledges that they've fought over something which it doesn't even matter, and and I think it's very telling that they actually do instill that into the episode. Yeah,
it is a huge kind of satire, a huge kind of... It's a massive dig at religion, basically.
Yeah, but he says, doesn't he? He says religion is an excuse to be crappy to each other.
Yeah, and there's... I very much don't like this element of atheism. I never have. But there is an element of truth to it.
I've found it interesting that they're talking about, the cats built the arcs, and then, I mean, it's the longest long game for the Promised Land, which at time of recording has just come out, I think, last week or so. It's 32 years building up to what happened to the other arc that went on, and now the cats are back. But I think they covered it in some of the magazines, in like the comic strips, but there must be cat cities on board Red Dwarf.
Well, like relics?
Well, just the fact that there must be something still there showing signs of... Because they were down in the cargo base, weren't they, out of Holly's jurisdiction?
Yeah.
We find out. And I've always been interested to see them explore that a bit more in the sort of see like the relics of the cat kingdom. Because, I mean, when we do see the room later on that the cat is essentially been living in with the priest, it's very cheap. It's really cheap. I thought maybe as when the budgets got bigger, especially around 7, it would have been nice to see more of what happened during the cat's time on Red Dwarf.
My headcanon would instantly go, if they were talking about 7, would be that they cleared out all of that to fit all the Vindaloo that they got back from when they came back from 7.
Yeah.
When tickets arrived.
My headcanon says something similar. I think, in my head, the version of Red Dwarf that they return to is the one pretty much just before the leak that killed everybody.
That's what I was
so
thinking.
The cat cities wouldn't be there.
Yeah. Which is a good way to reset the way of the ship. But it would have been fun to see a bit more, obviously, because in a way, as of this episode, Kat and Lister are in a very similar situation now. They're, for all they kind of know, they're the last of their kind.
In the space of less than 2 hours, we're on episode 4 here, the lore of Red Dwarf is beautifully rich. The fact that over however many series they never further explored this part of the lore just shows you how deep the background and the setting of Red Dwarf is.
The ship's meant to be, was it 15 foot long? 15 miles long.
They said it was the size of a city, didn't they? So
Yeah.
Which is always peculiar because there was less than 200 staff on board.
Yeah.
yeah, but we weren't. Mark, we agreed not to talk about these issues.
Oh, no, I've got an answer. I've got an answer for
Okay.
you. Well, it's a mining ship, so the vast majority of the ship is empty space for putting rocks in.
Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough.
And there's the scutters as well. They never really sum up how many scutters were on the ship.
You only ever see 2, but again, budget.
Well, I just think of the 2 because they're the most sassy ones in the group.
Oh, maybe. Do they eventually get names, those 2 scutters, or have I imagined that?
One's called Bob. Who's the more sort of famous one is Bob. Rimmer refers to them, I can't remember if it's in this series or the next, as Pinky and Smegging Perky. Because Lister tells him to get the scutters to do something. But there's definitely one called Bob.
So, Rimmer returns to quarantine and Lister returns to quarantine and tries to talk to Rimmer and confide in him about the guilt he's feeling about being a god. And Rimmer is completely focused on his Quagars, as he calls them. Double A. And wasn't it double R?
No, I think it's double A, double R.
It's
Quagars.
Quagars. And so Lister loses temper and goes to find the cat. But I think there's something really important here about how people are focused on their own shit, their own faith.
Yeah.
In this scene.
I mean, Rimmer is heavily focused on what he's doing, but he raises a few good points in that. When Lister said, I wish I could have, apologised and said something. Rimmer's dead on when he says, God turns up in all his splendour and says, sorry, it's all been a massive cock-up. You're going to do way more damage, and I think that might tie in a bit with what Lister does later in the episode with the priest. And that, Rimmer's got a point, if someone's got their belief system and you may not agree with it, but if it's all they've got, especially in the case we're going to see there, it's worse for Lister to destroy it, I think, on this one, because he's destroying a dying man's faith that he spent an entire life.
Well, that goes back to we mentioned a couple of episodes ago about I mentioned about a couple of episodes about Lister's humility, the fact that we will find that he, at the end of the day, he's portrayed as a slob, but as we've talked about how intelligent he is, and how emotional intelligent he is, now how empathy plays a real big part in his role. That it's interesting you mentioned that, 'cause I didn't put the two together, but it's definitely right that Rimmer's mentioned it and Lister's followed it through, and Lister's empathy at the end of the episode really comes through. He can't let the truth be known to him. He's got to let him pass away with the knowledge that that he's met Cloister, and obviously Lister plays the part by literally sort of threatening the cat to say, do not under any circumstances ruin this. Yeah,
I think it also shows how much Rimmer's believing in what he's doing, because this is the angriest we've seen him since the show started, when he just explodes.
Well, he exploded that much that this morning I was making my notes and I wrote Rimmer gets angry, and the second I wrote that, we had 2 power cuts in the space of 10 minutes. So he's done.
That can't be coincidence.
Exactly. We had. It was like literally the end of the world here. There was alarms going off and everything, and back on. I was actually getting worried I wasn't going to be able to record today. But yeah, it was. Rimmer gets angry was the note that I made.
It's one of the only swears as well. Well, there's not a made-up word that they've used. When Rimmer says bastard, it's really venomous as well. It's one of the only times. There's a few more that pop up over there, but this is one that's said with real anger.
It's interesting you say that, because you haven't seen it, but there's a scene in one of the Dave ones where twat's used.
Is it?
Yeah, but I can't really tell you because it's a bit of a spoiler, so I'll leave it to you. But
there's another scene where they use twat, though. Let's go out there and twat them. But it's not the...
Oh, yeah.
Well,
that's
the one when it got released on VHS where it had to have an 18.
Because of the word twat?
I think it was because of the word... because of the word twat and clitoris. Rhythm comes up with the name for the group. And it's
the acronym.
Oh, I can't wait to get there. Oh, that's a fantastic scene.
You can't wait to get to the clitoris, Kurt? Is that what you're saying?
Unlike yourself, Mark, yes, I can't wait to get there.
Yeah, I'm not interested in that so much.
That's the only episode that's got a warning at the start of it, hasn't it? That says that this has got some adult language and themes of an adult nature in it. You have been warned.
Yeah.
But that was enough to... I think it was 15, actually. It was enough to knock the certificate for the VHS up to a 15. So it shows how rarely they actually swore.
There is nothing like a warning like that to make kids want to fucking watch something.
Yeah. Oh, it's like when Channel 4 used to do the red triangle. And it was that sort of gave you the warning of this isn't for kids, that you immediately... this was probably... I wasn't old enough to appreciate what it was, but I remember hearing about there was a red triangle, but that basically just meant tits.
I'd have appreciated that as a kid.
It was just... it was Channel 4 used to have a red triangle.
Interestingly enough, I've just gone through my DVDs while you were talking there, and not all of them are 12s. So it must have been downgraded. Yeah, they must have downgraded it.
It's changed over time.
Oh yeah. But I just thought, I'll have a look and see if they kept that rating, but they haven't. All the seasons have gone down to 12. There's only just the Smegs that are 15.
I'm sure I remember the Smeg-ups being 18.
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
So yeah, there's a definite change over time.
I mean, I used to have all the bottom VHSs, and when the fluff one came out, the outtakes video, that was an 18. That was a hard 18 because it was just Rick Mel swearing.
Yeah.
Which was that was in the day when comedians used to release their live shows when there'd always be 18 because there'd be swearing in it. Because it wasn't the family friend like Smith and Jones and Lenny Henry, and they always come out at Christmas. And now you could easily get them on telly, and they could have the exact same act, and no one would really bat an eyelid.
How culture has changed.
I think it's for the better. No one fucking cares if you fucking swear.
Yes.
And if you do, get the fuck over it.
Exactly.
Sorry, that's my I just fell off my soapbox.
I better mark this podcast as explicit then, eh?
No, I mark all my podcasts as explicit, even if I haven't sworn, just in case, because I probably haven't. I've forgotten. The cat is in the cargo decks with a priest who is dying and has lost his faith, and Lister comes in and does this grand entrance as Cloister to talk to this old cat. And I think there's just such a decency in what Lister does here.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to how the relationship between the cat and the priest that I always found interesting. That from what we gather in this scene, the priest kind of raised the cat, didn't he? From what we can see, but the cat just thoroughly does not appreciate it.
Again, that's the whole cat being like a cat thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I do love the statue as well with the. Because it kind of looks like Craig Charles. I'm guessing they maybe plaster cast him with the donut and the giant sausage. And yeah, it's. I didn't realise that when I first watched this that the priest is supposed to be blind.
It's important that he doesn't see that Lister is a bit of a smeghead,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of good though that if like I'm not a religious man, but it's like that God doesn't take a form. Well, he doesn't see a form. He meets God in inverted commas, but he has no idea what God looks like. It's just this voice, which is how in most media God is portrayed anyway, as like a voice speaking from the clouds. But he's actually in the same room, but he can't tell what it looks like. I think that's good for the priest in terms of like keeping his faith.
Yeah, and it's also very much a death scene. You could, in theory, look at it in a way of he is approaching death, and it's a typical tale of what people say that they see, or that how people react at the point of death and things. And I know my brother, when he died, my mum had said that he pointed to the top corner, and we're not religious by any stretch of the imagination, but you can imagine people taking that as as a religious symbol that he's seen something, or he's seen like past relatives, or that he's moving on, or whatever, or it could just be a trick of the brain, or a hallucination, or whatever it may well have been at that point when he did die. But this is very kind of similar in that ilk, that it's the episode's called "Waiting for God," so I think that there is that, and the way that Lister enters into the room as well, that there is that connotation of what comes at the point of death, and that's really deep for a 30-minute comedy.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's also, again, in my job as a funeral celebrant, there's a huge argument between the humanist celebrants, that whether or not, for the sake of kindness, you should allow a religious element to people's ceremonies. And Lister makes a choice here. He doesn't believe this religion. He knows it. Well, he actually knows that it's baloney because he knows where it's come from. But he's still kind to this person. And for me, if someone wants a prayer in a ceremony, I will just say, I won't lead it, but if you want someone to say one, you can. A lot of other celebrants don't do that at all, and would say that I'm not being a humanist celebrant by allowing a religious element, even if it's very brief, into a ceremony. And I think this, in a lot of ways, shows the difference between being kind and not, even if you can't agree with someone's religious or belief system,
I mean, it's before, as Lister, because Lister overhears him as he comes in, excuse me, and the priest's speech before Lister bursts through the doors is, when you think about it, some pretty heavy stuff. He's just realised everything he's done has been worthless. And so he's like, everything's been a lie. He's wasted his life. He tells the cat to burn the hat, which, the hat's fantastic, it has to be said. Also, in this scene, Danny Jones, if you'd have told me a neon green zoot suit would look good on anybody, I'd have gone, that'd be wrong. But it looks fantastic on Danny John Jules.
Yeah.
But the priest is just like he's about to die. His entire life's been wasted, and it's a lie. And Lister's heard that, and he's like Mark says, there's any person with any ounce of compassion in their heart must realise like this is the only thing you can do. It's like regardless of your belief, it's like if this guy believes you're God, at least until this guy passes away, you are God. Because this man's dedicated his entire life basically for you. Or to you. And yeah, it's a pretty heavy speech as he was going into there, yeah.
It's pretty bleak, but it's not over-egged, I don't feel. I feel like it works as both drama and as comedy, and that's a credit. Once again, that's a credit to the writers.
Yeah. I think it helped as well, they got like a proper darling sort of actor in there to play the priest. Apparently he's a very sort of theatre actor. I think he did like a lot of Hammer horror and stuff like that. He's a very darling, I worked with Gielgud. One of those sort of actors. I think that helps as well with the performance. Yeah,
and I think it's a true performance as well because he did keep forgetting his lines. And I know that the Smeg-Ups show a couple of them, but they did say that he was really, really struggling to remember stuff, so they didn't want to change his lines too much because he just couldn't physically cope with it. And to have someone of that mentality and where he was at the moment just goes to show that they really wanted that gravitas, that like Shakespearean, someone who's walked the boards, who were able to give that Shakespearean speech. I mean, Wilfred Shakespeare I don't think is any. There's no surprise that that's mentioned earlier on, because I think that because there's that link to it that he's very much a walking the boards kind of guy, and that gravitas that speech does really ground it, but also gives you that gravitas of what you would expect to hear from somebody like that. But it is interesting how he was in his later years, and he himself was struggling with it.
It's when he lets out that pained, you don't exist. And like for a show that was shot on, shoestring and hope that Red Dwarf was in those early years, it's a great shot where it's very obvious he pops his head to send his sunglasses flying, but when the Lister bursts open the doors and he's in silhouette, and the light sort of shines on the priest, and the music kicks in. That's probably one of the better shots of the series so far.
Yeah.
And then when you think about the premise of it, he's wearing a giant donut on his head. And it's
holding a giant sausage as well, don't forget that.
Sausage. It's ridiculous. But it looks really good. And yeah. It also I'm still trying to figure out how you can threaten somebody with a giant golden sausage. As Lister manages to do by holding under the cat's neck.
We're back at quarantine where Lister is opening the pod for Rimmer, pulls out a chicken, and Rimmer thinks it's a Quagar warrior. The credits roll, and then there's a pause in the credits. It's a smegging garbage pod!
I laughed so hard when I first saw that bit where it pauses. I thought it was a bit of a weak ending to start with, and then when I first watched it, I was like, oh, and then he screams, it's a smegging garbage pod. I just remember falling off the sofa laughing when I first saw it.
It's really innovative. It really is very clever and innovative, and I loved it. And I think playing with the credits, when done right, is so good. Like in Fringe, when they changed it to the 80s Plinky Plonky thing for the theme
I've literally
tune.
just watched that episode a few nights ago because I'm on, surprisingly enough, I'm on the We Made This podcast network with an episode of Fringe. But I watched that and the Over There episode as well, where they change it to red. I think that is brilliant when they do that.
They do it in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as well, where they change it to Agents of Hydra. And when it's done right, messing with the credits is so fucking clever. And I wonder if this probably wasn't, but this is an early example of it. And I wonder if it was the first. Probably wasn't the first.
Yeah, it's great. Again, this scene as well shows how much Rimmer wants it to be true. The fact that that is blatantly a chicken that Lister is holding up. It's blatantly a chicken, and Rimmer still entertains the idea for another 10 seconds.
Yeah.
That these Quagars could have possibly been chickens. I'm trying to remember now. Is the cat in this scene? He's not. So I wondered, now that the priest's gone, I can't. So I'll have to rewatch the rest of the series.
I think it's earlier in the episode. I don't think it's before he goes down there, isn't it?
Yeah. I was just wondering that now the priest's gone, the cat spends more time with the main crew because they're the only other people around. That's where his food is.
Yeah.
So he's... Yeah. Cause,
I do tell a lie. What it was later, but Cat isn't in it. No, I think he stays down with his adopted parent. I think.
Well, that's the other thing we find out about his parents, don't we? In the previous, the cripple and the idiot. I just like it because it's one of the only moments where the cat kind of stops being the cat for a moment. Is the line, "My father was a jelly brain." It's probably him at his most serious so far when he realises what's happened.
Yeah.
I think there's an element of nudging towards a similarity between the cat and Rimmer there, actually, because Rimmer isn't proud of his folks either. But I don't think they then explore that at any other point.
I can't think of the cat being mentioned, the cat's parents being mentioned ever again. It's not something that's jumping out at me anyway.
No, the only other thing I think he mentions it in a previous episode where he talks about Kitty School, but that's kind of it. Past-wise, he just doesn't talk about it.
It's interesting they haven't minded that, actually. But I suppose you'll find with the Dave stuff, I mentioned this, I think, either in the primer or one of the first episodes that we did, is that the Dave stuff really kind of finds the heart of Rimmer, and they know what to do with Rimmer. So, and that becomes, in some ways, more of the heart of the show, and Lister's, although he's still there, the focus is shifted more towards Rimmer's story, and they find that there's more depth, there's more drama to that than Lister. So it's interesting that, if they haven't done that with the cat, that maybe because you would be repeating yourself.
Yeah. So no, he's probably the only one over the years who, when there's been an episode based around him, is the one who it tends to get dropped. So if there's Danny John Jules has mentioned there's been about 3 cat episodes that never got made. I think there's the one where he's got to have sex or he dies is one, I think, and there's another one where he meets another cat, and there's all sorts of ones, but they never get made.
Well, there's some that's definitely been repurposed in the new seasons, and just from what you've said there, because he does meet another cat in one, and there's a issue with him having sex and stuff. So I think they might have repurposed some of that stuff that you just mentioned there in the later seasons.
Brilliant. I'm looking for. Do you know? I'm so looking forward to these new series. My biggest fear was that they were going to be crap.
I'm hoping that my biggest fear is that they are actually crap, and you're taking my word for it.
I think we're a long way off anyway.
Yeah.
All right then. What was your favourite part? I'll go to you first, Kurt. What was your favourite part?
I personally think, just to pick a moment rather than being my favourite part, is Talkie Toaster. I think I think therefore I am. It wasn't. He doesn't say that, does he? He says,
I toast,
therefore I am. And again, it's something we've not touched upon in the episode, actually, that the Toasters wanted to become more than what he is. Rimmer's wanting to look for more, looking for something out there, and Lister is dealing with something that he wants to be known for less than what he is, where Toasty wants to push the boundaries and become something and aspire to be something else.
Do you know, these shows are so much cleverer than I've ever given them credit for. I thought they were just throwaway fun. Very good throwaway fun. Yeah. But they really are fucking clever, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, even the cat he's going around telling people about how he's gone investigating and things like that. So he's trying to talk about his achievements as well. He never finishes the story, though, does he? Was it once upon a time there was an old man, and that's all we hear. And I've always wondered what the end of that story was, or if that's what we've just watched. if the cat's just going to tell the story that Lister just witnessed.
What was your favourite part then, Carl?
I think it's the scene where Lister and Rimmer are both sat outside the pod, and Lister's trying to confide in Rimmer about how much he dislikes this religion that was built around him. Just because it kind of shows the two of them, in, like we said, Lister not wanting to have this responsibility. And even in that point, you hear Rimmer go, I could have been God if I was given the right, the chances you'd had. Which kind of sums up Rimmer in a way to me. It's sort of like he's treating God like a job. And it's a job that he's put on his list of like, well, I didn't get that, but it was because of this, rather than anything. I mean, to be fair, he's almost got a point, because Lister happened upon it by chance, but it's just a very good scene for those two in showing what they believe in, and and I think it's almost a slightly good bonding moment between them, especially when they start yelling "tot" at each other. Which I always found really funny, just them yelling that, just this almost like older, not particularly offensive word, well, not very offensive at all, and just yelling at each other. Very brother-like.
Again, this probably boils down to the fact that it's my favourite character, and it's just done so well. It's just like, catch that string, you can't have my shiny thing, and Danny John Jules completely and utterly embracing the fact that he is playing a person cat.
Yeah.
And whenever I watch that scene, I just want to go and get my fishing rod toy and go and play with my own cat. And it's just so perfectly done with real conviction. And I just fucking love cats. So, before we go, social media time. Carl, tell us where people can find you on that there internet.
You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook at I am Mr. Carl, that's Mister, and everything I'm doing on there you can see through there.
And Kurt, what about yourself?
Find me on Twitter at rmuldrake, it's RMULDRAKE. I'm also on the Star Trek Universe podcast, Make It So, which has been covering Star Trek Picard and recently Star Trek Discovery. At the time of recording, we were just waiting for Season 3 of Star Trek Discovery. You can find that on Twitter at Jean-Luc Podard. And you can also find me on the Millennium podcast, which will have finished Season 2 by the time this airs. We're getting prepared for Season 3 in the later part of the year. And that's at the Time Is Now pod as well. And I'll be jumping around in other shows as well. So find me on rmuldrake to see what I'm up to at any given moment in time.
And for me, in a similar vein to Kurt, I do pop up on the odd We Made This podcast network show, but my two main ones are Life's Milestones and Don't Say the C Word, which are a celebrant podcast and a random We're in Lockdown, I haven't got anything better to do podcast, respectively. You can find those at Life's Milestones or at Don't Say the C Word. My personal Twitter is at MarkAdamsHC, and if you're interested in what I do outside of podcasting, you can look for Mark Adams Humanist Celebrant and or Mark Adams Wrestling Ring Announcer on Facebook. And that's all we have time for on this episode of Shipwrecked and Comatose. So until next time,
Oh, Mark, how are you looking now?
I'm looking nice.
He's not my type.
Elsewhere on We Made This. The Movie Palace.
Anyway, I mean, what kind of aspects of his films do you really enjoy? Because obviously we're speaking now, decades after the fact. But, the great thing is many of his films do continue to kind of resonate and stand up tremendously well today. So, yeah, what is it you like about Hitchcock?
Jeez, there's so much I like about him.
Yeah.
Where do I start? He's just, I think I was actually having this discussion with my mom the other day because, as I said, she's the only one who ever really wants to watch these films with me. And I said to her, I think what he was particularly great at was showing how small people's lives actually can be, like the minutiae.
We played this.
There is this disability advocate called Sam Bosworth, who is a really avid gamer, who does talk a lot about accessibility of games and about how people shouldn't be shamed for wanting an easy mode, and that shouldn't be a controversial topic in the gaming community. And also how I can't remember what the game was, but there was this, I think it was a PS2 game, was it? I can't remember. It wasn't PSP, it was PS4. But basically you had to use pedals for this driving game, and he can't do that. So they had to basically find a way to alter the game themselves. Yeah. The developers didn't think about that.
The time is now. A Millennium podcast.
Rating has been for this episode, and if not, would you like to hazard a guess?
I gotta admit, Kurt, that I am kind of cheating because I have the page open.
I like that you're only kind of cheating. I like that it's not really cheating.
Well, it wasn't intentional cheating, but now that you ask, my guess is it's probably like an 8.9 is my guess.
Yeah, and would you guess around 440 people voted?
Yeah, probably around there. Yeah.
I tell you what, you're bang on. It is the best rated episode of Millennium.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod, and we are part of the We Made This podcast network, which can be found online at wemadethispod.com or on Twitter at We Made This Pod.